Um, I have Tesla and new energy that I want to cover briefly because it occupies a lot of my cabinet there. But I want to talk a bit about hydrocarbons in the context of that. There's no shortage of hydrocarbons, although a lot of people will tell you we're running out of oil. They've been telling us that in Alaska for a long time, and we're not. The real hydrocarbons in Alaska are locked up in coal, and there's a lot to be said about coal. I'll mention that briefly for a few minutes because I think it ought to be heard, because there is no shortage. We have enough coal in Alaska alone to run energy needs for about 1,000 years or two that we know about. Up to 2,000 years, enough BTUs that are known, British thermal units stored up in coal here. But coal they don't like to use, right? That's considered ugly coal. But there's a technology that was developed by ExxonMobil, and the technology patents were owned by a company called Excelergy, and I worked with them for a while here in Alaska when they were trying to put together a coal to liquids project. Now, what does that mean? In World War II, Germany didn't have any oil, but they had coal, and they had developed the Fischer-Tropsch method for getting about 3 barrels of oil out of every ton of coal. That was one of the ways they were able to have a military, actually. What they've developed since is a way to get about 5.5 barrels of petroleum out of a ton of chunk coal. And what they do now is they do it way differently. They break it down molecularly into each element. So you get mercury and sulfur and carbon and hydrogen all broken out separately. And then you introduce some extra hydrogen like natural gas. You need about 40% of what a natural gas line would have produced, which is what they were trying to sell at the time, to feed one of these to get enough hydrogen into the mix. But then what they do is they reconstruct those molecules into synthetic fuels so they can get gasoline, diesel, JP8, and something called JP10, except in the form of a biodegradable fuel that'll break down in the environment without the damage that the other petroleum products generally produce. I don't know how that all works, but I know they can drink it and not kill you, and that is what the data shows. Now, why that's important for Alaska is we got all these rural villages that have storage situations that aren't always ideal. A biodegradable fuel would be a great idea for most places. Now, the JP10 offered something else, 20% more energy per gallon or per liter, meaning less fuel to get further, or more freight and less fuel if you're hauling freight, or more range for a drone, or more bombs instead of fuel for a plane. So JP10 would have made Alaska a great place to land when freight companies could move more freight for less money. All right, so we were pushing this. It had a 0 carbon footprint, which meant that to balance the load of what you were creating in carbon, the thing was you grew this synthetic blue-green algae that you squeezed the oil out of, you threw back into the process to be more efficient with the coal, and then the material left over was an organic fertilizer that was extremely effective, the blue-green algae left over. And then what you had is a 0 carbon footprint. It neutralized, it went to 0, or you could even add more blue-green algae and make it even a net gain to reduce carbon. So you could manage that, so you had a 0 carbon impact. Then people worry about coal dust and dams breaking. This didn't create any coal dust. What you had at the end was something called bottoms, which was a tar-like material that was mixed with gravel, and you got asphalt that paves roads. No waste, everything used. Took a square mile to create a plant, but it would have produced 20% of what the Trans-Alaska Pipeline produced in petroleum products of a biodegradable nature, and used a hydrocarbon to do it. It didn't happen here because China had 18 plants they wanted to convert, and here it would have been a 10-year regulatory process. So in the middle of it, they left, they went to China and did it there. Not the end of hydrocarbons, but they are changing. My bet is that within 20 to 30 years, it won't even be a hydrocarbon economy in the way it operates today. It'll be replaced with a better technology, something more in line with what Tesla had in mind. And what he dealt with was oscillating electromagnetic fields. Look at all of his patents and all of his work. It dealt with pulsating energy in different ways to create different effects. He did everything, according to the literature, from triggering earthquakes with electromagnetic fields, something that Elizabeth Rauscher, one of the best physicists in the world, did in her research, was knowing that certain signals were produced in advance and during earthquakes, and she predicted models that were really efficient. It was the last book she was working on before she died that didn't get printed, unfortunately. But energy is in abundance. This is something Tesla knew, that we could tap the vacuum, so to speak, and gain energy not from nothing, but from mechanisms that weren't well understood. We're there now. Those technologies are on the planet now, and they're going to come into general use in the next 20 or 30 years, and hydrocarbons are going to be gone. It's going to have a big impact on my region here in both ways. We're going to produce those metals that are necessary for that new technology, and the minerals are going to come from Alaska and a lot of other places. But oil and gas is going to be relegated to plastics and pharmaceuticals economically, because think about this. If you own a mortgage and a car and are living in the normal lifestyle of most Americans, you have debt, a lot of it. And probably a third of your money is being paid to government in the form of taxes, and a third of your money is being paid in interest, either directly to interest you pay or through all the businesses that pay interest on all the debt that they have. That's the banker's tax. They get a third of your life for most people in the West. The government gets a third of your life and you get a third for yourself. Isn't that wonderful? Do you feel free? Do you feel liberated? Are you happy about it? And it didn't start out this way. All of that was called slavery, and now we are all slaves to a system we allowed to be built around us. And now we're all locked in our homes, slaves and prisoners, and no one's bringing us groceries. We have to pay our own bill. How about that? Home of the brave, land of the free. Is it really? I don't think so. The Germans right now, when I used to lecture there and I said, you know when the power goes out and they'd all just have a blank stare, and now they don't have a blank stare. The fact that the whole economy is shut down. I used to produce a product in Germany. I moved it to Poland where the economy's open. And you know what? I'd never move anything to Germany again. They don't know how to run a government or an economy. Look at the mess they have. And the good thing they're all shut down, because they've been shutting their nuclear power plants down and their coal plants down and putting up wind and solar. The problem is that you can't balance the power grid. Now they have power shortages. And if their industry wasn't bankrupt because they've been shut down for a year and a half and the power were on, they'd find out they can't even run the industries they had. And they're lucky they're not going to have them anymore, because at least they'll keep the home lights on, because there aren't any factories running there, until all the money runs out. And then Germany looks like it did a long time ago. Rethinking this, we've built an entire industry, and we didn't even touch on it, based on explosion. There's an entire way of thinking about energy based on implosion. It goes back to Callum Coates and a lot of researchers that were operating within Germany just before the war. And a lot of their ideas got lost in the shuffle. But a lot of those ideas are coming back. There's new ways to look at energy. That's going to be the currency of the 21st century, the balancer. Energy, when energy gets cheap enough and free enough, then you can grow all the food you need. Look at the Netherlands, what they grow in greenhouses to feed a good chunk of Europe. Doesn't take a lot of space. What it takes is the application of technology, the understanding of abundance, and ways to empower people again. And for the few, the 1,000, and there's only about 1,000 of the ultra greedy that are destroying this planet, we need to get a count. We need to open up the doors of transparency. We need to create whistleblower mechanisms that go against corporations and individuals and governments that work against what's good for human beings. And there ought to be a way to do this differently in a complex world, and I believe there is.